I lived nearby, just in Thetford, a couple of towns up over the Connecticut River. I started in high school taking a photography course in film. And then when I went to Dartmouth, I worked for the college newspaper, The Daily, and would carry a camera around with me. It was these layers of experience that wound up affecting me that I didn't quite realize until I actually stopped to think back. John Douglas is a local photographer, been involved in lots of environmental stuff, and just a really interesting guy. And we met because he just showed up at our sugar house a year or two after we started sugaring, my wife and I. It's right across the street from our house. And he said, "Can I take photos?" And I knew a little bit about photography, but what I saw him do was really fascinating. He's a very charismatic, fun guy to hang out with. And that was very critical to his photography because he elicited us being natural and letting him into the scene as one of us, and his ease in engaging with people and his genuine interest in what we're doing. It all sort of made sense to me from my early journalism type photography. I think one of the reasons why I got so into the wildlife side of things is because of my wife. I was a bit into photography, and when you have someone who's an excellent observer and has that next level of knowledge than you do, it's kind of inspiring. Like, oh, I'm curious now. I want to go out and see this. I think that's happened with our kids. We've been careful not to cure them of this, of going out in the woods and their parents doing the blah 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 stuff. What I like taking pictures of, the action of doing it, is being out in the wilderness, out in the woods, out in nature. And that's usually unsuccessfully. We did this for 4 hours yesterday, unsuccessfully outside looking around for particular things. And that's wonderful. Oftentimes it's a particular subject I've taken pictures of before, and I want to catch it in a certain way or in a certain light or a time. But the products I like, the pictures I like best, are often of people. When I got into photography in high school, in film, one of the things that it was fascinating to me was the idea that you take a picture of stuff with people interacting, and we're so finely tuned to people's expressions and how they interact that when you freeze things, you see stuff. And the idea that you can actually capture the mood, kind of the vibe of an interaction, was really fascinating to me. In the middle of last century, street photography came out. Henri Cartier-Bresson, this French guy, essentially popularized this amazing photographer, and he talked about this depends how you translate it in French, like the vital moment. So trying to get that was the challenge. It was like a treasure hunt. With wildlife photography, there's a slow pace of that. It's kind of interesting, where you may take a photograph and think, this is fantastic, I got a bobcat. But then you realize, oh, but the background kind of stinks. It's distracting. The sticks are too close to the subject in the focal plane so that they're this like kind of mess. And it's an imbalanced composition. So then you keep the camera out there and you change things. You change the angle, you lower the perspective, you tweak and tweak and tweak and tweak. So where street photography is, walking around the green and kind of stealing a photograph from reality, you wind up doing this highly iterative thing, sometimes over years, to get mostly to not get, but sometimes to get the shot you're looking for. My favorite changes from month to month, where I'm interested in, I got into using the camera to take data of some of these things. So sometimes you're looking to take the picture that you feel evokes what you're trying to show, what you feel about this thing you want to show people. But in doing that, you realize, oh, this is kind of interesting. And you look up in the literature, why is this creature doing this? And oftentimes I find it's not in the literature. You're observing something that isn't well studied. And there's just a lot of that, surprisingly, for a layperson like me who's not a scientist. So I've been getting involved in projects looking to explore hypotheses about why animals do certain things. I cooperated with a couple of ornithologists in Arizona on a study on Cooper's hawks, because I happen to have a Cooper's hawk on my property. Took a picture every 4 seconds for the entire nesting season at 80 feet up in the air from a tree next door. And kind of crazy stuff like that. And so that, when I'm doing that, by far my favorite images are the things that come out, often happenstantally, often not part of the data set, but with the camera I take with me to change the batteries, 80 feet up. I like broken cameras. I am a big buyer of broken cameras on eBay. And what's wonderful, my favorite thing to find is a camera that has a broken screen and a viewfinder that has a crack and 2 buttons missing. Because I can put that out in the woods with an infrared trigger and compose it and set it up exactly as I like. And cover it just with a piece of waterproof canvas. And change the batteries maybe every 4 weeks and it's like having another person up there observing.
Wow.
So I usually have a dozen or a couple dozen of these cameras out there. And sometimes bad things happen to them, but I now have 5 or 6 really broken cameras that I can pirate for parts. So from a technical perspective, it's death on cameras, because I have this camera out in the woods, and when you tilt it up, its light hood is like a bucket for rain. So you wind up improvising all sorts of crazy contraptions with clothespins just to get it out there and not dying. But that animal's eye perspective, and that's a recognized, like in wildlife photography, that's like if you were to see a top 10 list of tips, that's something that people, but doing it is really hard. And if you're out there in person, it's really hard because you're human height. There's a lot of complexity to getting those angles, whether it be getting on the ground, and then you get all sorts of strange things happening. Like not only is there a ground effect for sound, there's a ground effect for temperature, and different temperatures of air, different densities. You get weird things going on, dew, and it gets complex. But ultimately, when it comes to the perspective of the photo and giving you that sense, there's this patch of lady slippers that this wonderful woman, Martha Winke, who owned the house before us, she would go off every spring and see these lady slippers. And after we bought the house and she was staying at Kendall, we would invite her every year. We'd go to these lady slippers. And I started to notice bear sign just below. And my girl Lucy and I, we set up a camera. It was kind of fun because I had Lucy be the pretend bear so I could get the focus just right. So she pretended to be a bear walking up the path. And then later when we got not the bear photo we used, but we got many, many bear photos over a couple of years, I would Photoshop them with Lucy as though they were there simultaneously and send them to the in-laws. This is what we do in Vermont, we just have bears. That's one of those examples where it's the northwest side of a hill. In the early morning, you're going to have really not great light. Most of the day, you're going to have not great light. So you wind up patterning the bear. When do they come? You figure that out, but then half the time or more, for some reason, you get the back of the bear, not the front of the bear, going the wrong way on the trail. You iterate every 2 weeks. You have to come out and change a battery. You look at the photos, and you're like, oh, if only this. And then you change it. So that was one of those iterated photos over a couple of years. I really enjoy that people see the photographs and they think, oh, that's a really cute bear, or that's and then they realize, oh, this guy lives a town and a half away from me, and we share the woods. To see that sense of place which is really magical. And the more people get drawn into it, I think the more protective they are of it and appreciative.